I've been caught, but I'm keeping on check. I've been torn, but I'm keeping on check. I've been broken, but I'm keeping on check.
Good afternoon, good evening. This is Dove's husband, and you're back on Equal Footing. Another show overseas. So let me start by just saying that tonight we are going to be taking questions by text and by WhatsApp. We're not going to do live callers. I apologize. The second week in a row, but next week we commit to being back with live callers. We are live on air, though, so let me give out the numbers to send in questions or comments on tonight's subject, which is the difficulties around sometimes what is being referred to in the psychoanalytic community, therapeutic community, as sexless marriages. Yep, you heard me right, sexless marriage. We called tonight's show in our social media blast, Lost the Passion, Got the Pain, song reference for you music nerds out there. And it feels like in marriage we're assumed always to have wonderful physical intimacy. We've done shows before about kosher sex and kind of the channeling of lust in a positive way, and in the context of a married home, that's the case. We've talked about the laws of separation, of nida, and how that affects intimacy. We talked about the ways that couples learn about intimacy early in a relationship in Orthodox Jewish homes where there hasn't been exposure to physical intimacy prior to marriage. We touched on a lot of different subjects in this general zone, but never squarely what may be the most difficult topic of all, which is what to do in a relationship where you feel like the spark is sputtering, where the passion feels lost, where a partner feels unwanted, or you can't get your desire back. It's a real-world issue. It affects, we'll talk about the stats a little bit in a minute, affects a much larger percentage of couples than you think, both in the general population and in the frum community and the observant Jewish community. I said I was going to give out the numbers. I just wanted to give you a little teaser of what tonight's subject is. The numbers to text or WhatsApp in, actually just one number. What am I talking about? 917-428-4062. That's to send in an SMS, a text, or a WhatsApp tonight with a question or comment to our listeners, to our guests, I should say, 917-428-4062. And let me start now by introducing our guests. We have one guest who's been on a number of times before in the show and gives us wonderful insight from an observant perspective, but also from a very kind of real-world perspective, understands that not all of our listeners are observant, not all of our listeners are Jewish. Great real-world wisdom from Rivka Slonim. Rivka is the Associate Director of the Rohr Chabad Center for Jewish Student Life at Binghamton University. She co-founded that center with her husband in 1985. Rivka is a self-described Hasidic feminist. She's an internationally known lecturer and activist. She's the editor of Total Immersion, a mikveh anthology, and I think we've had her on the show on that topic in the past, in fact, on the mikveh. She's also written Bread and Fire, Jewish Women God in the Everyday. Rivka serves on the editorial board of the Rohr Jewish Learning Institute. She's a co-author of that institute's most popular courses, including Fascinating Facts. And she sits on the executive boards of the Tamim Academy as well as the Institute of Jewish Spirituality and Society. Hopefully we've got her on the line. Rivka, welcome back to Equal Footing.
A pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Rivka, I just want to say before I introduce your co-author and friend and fellow guest tonight that I really honor your bravery. You're always willing to be on in these very tough subjects that often involve confusion and pain for folks, and we exist as a show to make sure people know that they're not alone in this stuff. So thank you for being a part of that mission, Rivka.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I feel strongly that we need to talk about exactly those issues in a safe space with compassion.
Indeed. I want to introduce your colleague, friend, Sarah Morozell. Sarah is a Brooklyn-based scholar. She's a beloved mashpia. She's a much sought-after counselor. She teaches and mentors at the Beth Rivka Seminary in Crown Heights. She's the program director at mikvah.org. And in that capacity, she's created a host of online programming focusing on various aspects of family life. And after teaching Kala classes for over 2 decades, Sarah created the curriculum for and is the dean of mikvah.org's Kala Teachers Training Program. I'm sure we'll hear on the program what that's about. She's also a consultant to Kala teachers of all backgrounds from around the globe. Sarah, welcome to Equal Footing for the first time.
Welcome, and I'm happy to be here.
So let's dive right into the deep end of the pool. And I'm not going to go through all of the Torah references around what couples should be doing in the bedroom and how important sex is to relationships and Jewish wisdom and Jewish theology. But I think, let's see if I can just get an agreement here that there's nothing kind of unkosher or forbidden or shameful or anything else about sex in a Jewish way of life within a married relationship. We could, other time, let's say a married heterosexual relationship. We've done shows on controversial areas around homosexuality and traditional or Orthodox Jewish theology. We're not getting into that tonight, but let me just keep it simple for the moment. Can't promise I'm going to do that throughout the show, but for the moment, for a heterosexual married couple, there's nothing really kind of off limits, or very, very little that's off limits from a Jewish theological perspective when it comes to what you're doing in the bedroom. Is that right?
I would say that's correct, and the very premise of saying there's nothing really wrong, I think we're going at it the wrong way. Intimacy between two people who are married to each other, consecrated to each other, and during the time the Jewish law allows them to be intimate, is the single holiest thing people can do in this world. And that's not just a platitude. That's tethered to and supported by many, many details in Jewish law. So yes, I think we can say that unequivocally and get that out of the way. So anybody that's still suffering from any kind of shame or guilt or confusion surrounding this, I hope we can disabuse them of that.
Okay. So now that we have that out of the way, and for listeners that want to catch us on the technicalities, it's a little bit more complicated than that, I think, based on previous shows in terms of wasting seed, so to speak, and these types of topics. That's not really the purpose of tonight, to get into those technicalities. What we want to talk about here, and Sarah, I'm wondering how much, if you want to tell us about what the Kala teaching is about and how much you get into this, but it's what happens when a couple feels that they've lost the spark, where there's less sex going on than at least one of the two in a marriage would like. Is there kind of a headline? Is there headline guidance on that from a Jewish theological perspective?
That's a great question. And our passion and the way we teach our brides and our married women is that sex life does fluctuate. Intimacy does fluctuate. There are many factors that play in to desire, arousal. There could be environmental factors, there could be stressors, physical factors, emotional factors, medication. There's so much. And I think the key ingredient is honest and a healthy communication between husband and wife from the onset of their marriage. Because if they see that there are changes, and not only are there are there fluctuations in life in general, but between the husband and wife, their fluctuations are not necessarily synchronized. Discrepancy in desire is very common. The most important part of the equation is there healthy communication. We set up our marriages in a way that we communicate about our sex life, and we have ongoing conversations, and we are very aware of factors that play in to having healthy passion and healthy outcomes. Besides that, there's another part I want to say is, we discuss various even physical conditions, if it's vaginismus or other reasons for painful intercourse, what to do about it, because in Jewish, of course, in Torah, it's supposed to be a joyful, passionate, and very wholesome experience between husband and wife. So A, we have starting off with proper communication. B, a healthy sense of awareness, what's okay, what different reasons that could not work out. And then we have to find solutions to various issues that creep in between them. If I may also comment on...
Sarah and Rivka, let me just, for a moment, before we hit our first break, try to put some bounds around the size of this issue, of this problem. It was pretty tough to get some reliable research on the degree of couples' dissatisfaction with the level of physical intimacy in relationships as it pertains to observant religious couples. It's pretty easy in terms of the overall society, the overall numbers, at least in the United States. And we found one study from an organization called Bed Bible Research Center that does try to track these types of issues as it relates to religious couples and have a pretty good sampling of Jewish couples. Now, I was very surprised at the numbers. So in society overall, there are a variety of studies on the issue that end up between kind of the high 20% and up to 50% of heterosexual marriages. And to be fair, homosexual relationships do have a lower incidence of this. Probably a topic for another show. But in heterosexual marriages in general, in the United States, as high as 50% of marriages are self-reported as sexless. Now, that's defined as not having sex in the last year. I found that stat shocking. Now, it is somewhat skewed by folks that are in their 70s, 80s, even 90s, where you'd expect that there would be less physical intimacy. But even at the age of 50 and below, you see the numbers in the high 20s or early 30s in terms of self-reported, quote-unquote, sexless marriage. Now, I would have thought that in religious couples that might be a little bit of a better stat. I don't know why I thought that. I just did. And yes, it turns out that it is a little bit better. This is the best proxy we have for looking at the Orthodox Jewish community. This show is not just for the observant Jewish community, but we have a lot of listeners from the community. So let me just throw out a couple of these numbers that both of you see what you think. It's around a little bit over 15% of religious marriages report having not had sex in the previous year. That's a slight increase from the last time they did this comprehensive study a couple of decades ago. For couples under 30, the number is better, but still over 10%. And here's the number that I think that leads me to my next question to you, Rivka. Almost 80% of respondents, of individuals in religious, self-reported kind of religious marriages, 77% report that they want more sex in their marriage. So this is a pervasive issue. It's definitely an issue overall in society, and it's also an issue in our community. Rivka, what's going on? Has something changed in the recent past, or has this always been an issue, we just haven't talked about it?
I don't know. I have my very limited slice of life to look at. I'm not yet 60 years old. But I can tell you that over 25 years ago, Newsweek did a cover story on the celibacy plague in America. It's been an issue for a while. Probably has always existed, I'm going to guess, as long as humanity has been, but people didn't always talk about it. People started talking about it more clearly, and I think that we may be seeing a higher incidence of this because, frankly, I think we've lost our mooring on what intimacy is all about. We've separated sex from intimacy, and we've separated intimacy from the context that needs to be found within. In other words, there's a certain amount of carnal pleasure we can get in various ways at various times. But intimacy is something really hard to find, and intimacy that's nourishing and nurturing and lasts, that's really hard to find, and it's hard to build. It takes work. And I'm reminded of, I think it's Stephen Covey who said this, but maybe it was somebody else. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So what's the main thing? People have to take a critical look at what's the main thing for them. And in the book we authored together, Sarah and I, called Holy Intimacy, the Heart and Soul of Jewish Marriage, we over and over again underscore that the heart and soul of sexual intimacy is emotional intimacy, and one really has to look at what's fueling your emotional intimacy. What do you have together? What's your vision? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? And that's a large part, I think, of what we're seeing. People have just kind of decoupled sex from what it's supposed to be for human beings, because only human beings can have intimacy. Sex and intimacy are two different things.
Our first
so we
break.
forget that. We get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah. We're going to take our first break here. Rivka, I want to put a pin in that because there is some interesting countervailing evidence from the psychoanalytic community around that point, around whether there's been a more connection between physical intimacy and emotional intimacy or less for young people today. We'll be right back on Equal Footing. We're joined here by Sarah Morazal and by Rivka Slonim. We're talking about sexless marriages. We're talking about the passion, how to get it back, what do we do when it's gone. We'll be right back.
For me to say I never meant to break your heart. I'm to blame for all your pain. I never could have played that part.
Equal Footing is about talking about the tough stuff. We have guidance from Jewish wisdom on all aspects of life, including the stuff that sometimes causes us shame or confusion. We have a sponsor now for years, wonderful sponsor on this network that believes in the same thing. Tackle the tough stuff. I'm talking about Manhattan Medical, and it's their remedy for erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction is nothing to be ashamed about. It affects about 2/3 of men their lifetimes, and it obviously impacts the emotional well-being of couples. Manhattan Medical serves the community with an alternative to those expensive blue pills that are often not available to people because of side effects and comorbidities. Manhattan Medical uses for ED treatment something called Gaines wave therapy. It's been around for quite a while, successfully in Europe and Canada, more recently in the United States. The Gaines wave ED treatment from Manhattan Medical is non-invasive, it's surgery-free, it is painless, there are no side effects, and for the vast majority of patients, there are wonderful results. Check it out. Here's the number. 888-ED-CURE-9. That's 888-332-8739. If you call Manhattan Medical, and you do not have to be in Manhattan or even the New York area, anywhere in the United States you can get a teleconsult to get started. And if you call that number and you say that you heard about it on the Equal Footing radio show or the Dove Husband show, you'll get a $250 value, a free initial consult that you won't get otherwise. I'm going to give the number one more time. Call Manhattan Medical about their ED treatment. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It's easy and quick. And the number is 888-ED-CURE-9. Remember to mention that you heard about it on Equal Footing, 888-332-8739.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. And I've been told
Rivka, you're talking about the kind of decoupling of physical intimacy and emotional intimacy before the break. There's been some interesting academic research over the last 10 years, a lot of it published in Psychology Today and elsewhere, that kind of implies the opposite, that with the changing of gender roles and the differing expectations around sex, that younger couples in particular are having sex less. And one study says, I thought this is phrased in an interesting way, that equality of the sexes has an unintended casualty, and that is frequent sex. And so, without going through all of the research, and I'm not saying it's applicable necessarily in the religious community, but I'm wondering what you say to that, Rivka, because it feels like it's a fairly facile response that, we're not looking at emotional intimacy enough, and therefore maybe we're having sex less, but it seems like there's some academic disagreement on that point.
I'm not understanding what is the inadvertent casualty of equality of sexes? More frequent sex? Why is that a casualty?
Well, that's the question. I think that if I understand, and I'm looking at this is a study that was published by Lay and South a few years ago, and what they say is there's been a broad shift in cultural standards for emotional and sexual intimacy as it pertains to gender equality over the last 30 years. So
right.
as women bid for more attention and affection and romance, the frequency of sex has actually gone down.
All right, so that doesn't negate anything I said. That actually underscores it, because intimacy is not about what you want. It's about what you're building together with your partner, and for that reason, there has to be something higher than the two people that they're willing to each one give something for. Okay, I'm not going to launch into like a real, lecture here, but I'll just say very quickly, people talk about how important compromise is in marriage. But from the Jewish perspective, who wants to compromise? It's like a 50% ratio of what you're not going to ever really get that you want in your marriage. Instead, what we need is something called bitul, which means self-abnegation to something higher. And when both have something that is higher than their own desires and lusts and preferences at that particular moment, that they're willing to suspend what they want at that moment for, then they're going to actually be able to lean back into that and achieve emotional intimacy that will fuel their sexual intimacy in a healthy way. Now, of course, like Sarah said at the very beginning, there are some physiological and psychological roadblocks that can get into the way. But what I really do stand by what I said. I think as a culture, we worship the self-pleasure, et cetera, and that has made intimacy take a real hit. And, there's going to be less sex if all you're looking for is, at every moment, what's going to make me feel good right now, as opposed to, what do we have here together? What do we want to really build long term? Not just tonight, not just now.
Sarah, in your practical experience in working, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to interject. I just wanted to add another element to this discussion. So I'm not here. I don't know statistics. I don't do studies, but I have been teaching for a couple of decades, and I see there are new realities in the world that we live in that does make that sex could be more challenging, and to any couple, and that is the level of distraction. In order for us to our hormones to be fully activated, our minds, we have to be fully present and fully focused. And nowadays, we may say, like the previous study, there's so much connection between men and women, they work together, perhaps they talk more often, but is the connection really deep? Are we really making ourselves vulnerable and sharing our inner selves, or we're just having quick interchanges, exchange of words, a message, an emoji, and things like that? In a world where everything is out there, there's no privacy, everything is shared all over the place, plus the distraction of always being up to date from whatever's going on in social media. Life is very distracting. The beauty of, if you look in, we said, the guidelines, the Torah guidelines, when it comes to healthy, intimate lives, there's a large emphasis on privacy and total focus and being there all the way for each other. Our minds are totally focused on each other. Our hearts are totally focused on each other. The skin contact. We're tapping in to create an environment where there's the maximum oneness that we can actually feel between each other. So I think before we get into the degree of pleasure that is enjoyed during that time, we have to step back and go to the essence of it, which is true satisfaction and wholesomeness comes when the experience is like multidimensional. And in every facet, both our minds being focused on each other, our hearts being focused on each other, our bodies, we're totally present when our minds are, totally with each other. That wholesomeness actually is something very, very, brings security in the relationship. There's a very deep inner feeling of contentment that comes along. And of course, physical pleasure and climax, all that is crucial. It's very important to enjoy that time together, but it's not the measure of success should be not how much pleasure was generated in my body, but how connected we feel, how together we feel, how we bond, and how we're really there for each other on all levels. That's really it. And when somebody experiences that, then there's no limit. Like when it comes to physical pleasure, our bodies can only provide a certain amount, and then we have to have this accessory and that accessory, and perhaps, why not satisfy your pleasure a little more. But when it comes to that inner bond and connection, it just that deepens the whole experience. When people feel the richness of that, they want more, and they put more effort to create it. Now, it requires thought.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure for listeners that we're not in the realm of platitudes, because we've gotten a couple of notes from listeners already, and I'm sure that there are people that are thinking, yeah, this sounds good. I get the spiritual guidance, but there are practical reasons here that I'm in a sexless relationship or in a relationship where there isn't as much sex as I would like. There's quite a bit of academic work around this, things around communication, stress, mismatched libidos, when someone's dealing with a mental health issue or there's simply a rough patch in the relationship. Maybe it's financial. There's just maybe there's unrealistic expectations, or there's sex-related performance anxiety, or maybe you've just grown bored of each other. I mean, there's lots of practical reasons, and I want listeners to be able to kind of take home something that they can action a change on.
Okay.
What do you tell if you have a couple that you're working with, Sarah, and they say, we're just arguing all the time, and then we're feeling resentful, and then they're both saying and one saying, I just don't feel like having sex with him or having sex with her. What do you say to that?
Okay, so first of all, we have to backtrack. We have to make sure that the couple is on the same page. What is it that they're looking for? What is it that they're both looking for to experience at this time? And then we have two more practical points I want to mention. One is that perfection or expectations, unrealistic expectations can be very disappointing. Perhaps if the couple is already at this stage, I wish it could be stopped. It could have been prevented to get all the way down the road till we landed here, because prevention really is very important. If they have an ongoing communication, they can figure out what are the blockages and try to remove them as we go along on this journey. It shouldn't take a whole year. To be sexless a whole year, that could be due to trauma or to discord in the marriage. But on a practical level, why does it take a whole year for the couple to decide to have this conversation and be so disappointed about it? That's a long time, a whole year. So my response to that is...
Hopefully this show is helping couples take less time. But now they're with you. Now they're in they're looking to some mashpiach. They're in your office or whatever, and they're really struggling.
Okay, so we have to find out what...
Is there some sort of silver bullet?
No, because sex is so complex, and we really have to find out what is it that would stand in the way for one person, what stands in the way for the other person, what makes it better for one person, what makes it better for the other person. And the second point I want to say is to be spontaneous. It just adds trouble to this particular situation. I would say to brainstorm together and create a certain time. Today, let's say Tuesday, let's figure out how we could make it work the best way. Let's put into place whatever building blocks we need to, that we aim for more success as we begin to learn more about each other and put into place whatever we can have a better outcome based on both our needs. Now, sometimes we have to get the help of more professionals. We don't know what's standing in the way. We're being very vague. I truly believe I work with many...
In your experience, we're going to have to take a next break, but just a quick question to lead us to the after break discussion. Is the lack of libido or sexual desire in partnerships something you see more with women or men in your experience?
I don't see any difference between men and women. I do see that couples early on in the relationship, when they have ongoing communication and they're open with each other about expectations and needs, they navigate and negotiate and reach out for help much sooner. And that's when they end up being in a much healthier place. Now, there are some people that do suffer serious trauma, and they're suffering for underlying medical conditions, or they have to take certain medications that affect their hormones. There always will be that population that makes it much more difficult. But if they're aware of why this is happening, they accept and embrace each other with their limitations that are current, and hopefully, over time, they'll reach a better state of health. I argue with the fact that we're making a statement that it's okay to have a sexless marriage, because it doesn't have to be that way. It really, at any juncture in the relationship, we could press the reset button, and the first thing is, let's communicate about this. What are our expectations? What stands in the way?
We're going to need to take another break. I do want to get into that nitty-gritty, though. I want to get out of the platitudes. What do we actually advise? What are things that can be done to regain the spark? We'll be right back with Sarah Marzo and Rivka Slonim. We're talking about what to do when the spark is sputtering, when the passion feels lost. We'll be right back.
Feeling the years away and we can't relive it. Oh, I make you laugh and you make me cry. I believe it's time for me to fly.
Equal Footing with Dove Tusman is sponsored by MDCS Dermatology, your experts in skincare. With 2 Manhattan locations and 4 offices in Long Island, including Plainview and Commack, the dermatologists and skincare surgeons at MDCS are proud to be affiliated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and New York Presbyterian Hospital. So schedule your next skin exam in one of MDCS's convenient New York area locations. To make an appointment, go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-DERM. That's 212-661-3376. You can even schedule a virtual video visit with MDCS's board-certified dermatologists from the comfort and safety of your own home. So go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-3376. And don't forget to mention Equal Footing for 15% off all cosmetic procedures.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. And I've been taught, but I'm keeping on to.
You're back on Equal Footing, and we're talking about the very difficult subject of when you're married and you're struggling to feel desire for your partner, or maybe you're feeling unwanted. I want to get to I want to try to get more practical here. Rivka, what does Jewish theology say about things that you can do in the bedroom to reignite the spark? New sexual positions, kinks, sex toys, costumes, lingerie, role play, all that stuff. Is that allowed by halacha or Jewish tradition?
This is not a show about Jewish law, so I would say, for our purposes tonight, most generally, there are very few things that are not permitted in the bedroom. One very red line would be anything that the woman does not enjoy or does not want, because sexual intimacy is her husband's obligation. It's her privilege. And the second would be, and you referenced this earlier on, concerns with ejaculation that are contrary to Jewish law, meaning outside of his wife's body. But other than that, there's very little that one could say is against Jewish law categorically. But I'm going to push back at your question, and I'm going to say it's really almost impossible to address the couple's sex life without addressing everything that's going on outside of the bedroom. Can't really separate it. Now here I'm going to say I am not addressing physiological or psychological obstacles to happy sex and good sex. I'm not addressing trauma. I'm not addressing medication and so on and so forth, okay? But all things being equal, yeah, life's going to throw all kinds of stuff at you. And there are going to be ebbs, there are going to be flows, there's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. And but if you're attentive to the overall marriage, what I called emotional intimacy earlier, the best aphrodisiac is what's happening in the kitchen or the dining room or the living room before they get into the bedroom, because, you just can't separate the two. So yes, to your question, yeah, those are the things that you think are going to be helpful, and sometimes that may be exactly what is called for, and sometimes it's a form of escapism. In other words, it might help for a particular moment in time, but is that really where your real pleasure long term is going to come from? So yeah, you want to put somebody on a leash, you want to wear bunny ears, go for it. But is that really going to give you that satisfying feeling of homecoming, safe harbor, wholeness, that true intimacy is all about?
Well, if you look at the literature on the sex therapy side, outside of the religious context, that type of stuff is highly encouraged. That it creates kind of a feeling of freshness and newness that a lot of people feel at the beginning of a relationship and then self-report as having been lost. So I don't want to underplay that. I think it's important for listeners to hear, hey, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with trying that type of stuff if you're living a religious life or an observant life as you see it. Now, Sarah, you teach Kala, right? So you work with couples prior to marriage and probably early on in marriage around the issue, both the halacha and the shkafa, the intimate details of marriage. Do you work with couples throughout the relationship, or do you kind of they're out of the nest and then you let them go?
No, I work for couples all through the marriage relationship. I want to step back. I do work very closely with sex therapists that deal with the femme population. And every decade has their new twists. There's always something new that we want to learn. So you're correct in saying that all these the toys, the accessories, definitely can enhance and jumpstart romantic feelings and desire and definitely put things back into place. However, at the same time, in the last few years, we've seen a big shift, and I alluded to that before. And they call that the gas pedals and the brakes. And instead of having this sweeping, try this, try that, sit down and really individualize and figure out your particular situation, because no two people are the same. Just like when it comes to the appetite for food, some people enjoy meat, some people dairy, some people like salad, some people like the combination thereof, and it depends what season and what else is going on in their life, if they're traveling, if it's Shabbos, etc. The same, every single couple, we have to individualize and really brainstorm and figure out what is it that will make their sex life, fly, and what stands in the way. But there's a theme that is throughout a new kind of like what I alluded to before, something very crucial, and that is to be totally present. To be present, to be mindful is really in. Because of all that distraction, we're running, we're going, we're working, we're watching, we're reading, we're scrolling. And even when we're sitting next to each other, are we really connected? So in order to really connect to somebody, and in order to make ourselves vulnerable, the first thing we have to do is shut out the rest of the world and be totally present with ourselves, and then invite our spouse in that space of connection. So somebody who has been disconnected or just superficially connected, it's hard for them, for a long time, it's hard for them to suddenly make themselves vulnerable and kind of being emotionally undressed just like they're physically undressed. That transition does take time. And we want to do that in baby steps. The first thing is, can you sit next to each other and just enjoy each other's company? Can you hold each other's hands? Can you share something that's going on deep inside of you? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? You know, have some routine. Every couple should have routine where they show that connection in very real ways. You know, there's the 5 love languages. So as Ricky said, it doesn't start in the bedroom. There's every other area in the house where they could experience a deep sense of connection, but they have to go step by step. And I've seen a tremendous amount of success in regenerating very passionate and healthy sex lives, but just doing this simple exercise, which I said, number one, find ways to connect, to disengage of anything else that you're busy with right now. Be totally present, find real ways how you can connect, physically connect, emotionally connect, your thoughts, your emotions, whatever it is, and also sit down together. Sometimes you don't need a therapist, just you know yourself. If you're married that long, you know sometimes fatigue is an issue. Sometimes,
yeah.
Well, there's so many little things that get in the way.
Let's take a couple of listener questions that I think address some of this tougher stuff better than I can.
Can I just say something for a moment? It seems to me that maybe because we have dealt with this so extensively and we do continue to do so every day, Sarah and I are coming at this from looking at the cause, and I think you're kind of looking at this, you're looking at the symptoms, and we're saying and reiterating that in order to heal symptoms, you need to go to the underlying cause, and I think that's like a really important thing for us to all remember. And then let's take the questions, but that's really crucial.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's a delicate balance, right? And we see this a lot on the show because sometimes the talking about the cause can feel a little bit like speechifying, and so I think it's also important to address kind of hear people what they're going through and kind of address them where they're at. So let's try to do that with a couple of listener questions. So unsurprisingly, we have some listeners that are asking to remain anonymous, so I don't even have a name, just have a phone number. This listener has experienced, I'll just read it in the first person. My body has changed a lot. I'm 43. I got married when I was 22. I don't expect my husband to feel the same way about me that he did then, and frankly, I don't feel the same way about him that I did then. So this listener seems to kind of be resigned to the fact that 20 years into the marriage, that they're going to have less sex or have less desire for each other. What do you say to them, Rivka?
So I would say that, thank God, we change, we grow together. Marriage is not stagnant. It's a time of growth, and it evolves. And we have to recognize that as our lives evolve, and if we keep that connection going, in fact, our intimacy can be even so much richer and deeper, because the more we become, and this is true, I'm telling you it's true, it's not just platitudes and speeches, the more we focus on going through the challenging times together and the happy times together and embracing and supporting each other as we grow in life and perhaps, thank God, with our growing families, we actually we want to go back to that rock bottom security, and we crave that deep sense of connection and validation and support. Yes, it comes along with pleasure. Of course, we need to have pleasure, but that's, again, it's a nice byproduct. what
so
can happen is
let me make sure this listener takes away the core point. Are you saying it's okay? Like, you know what? It's all right that you don't feel the same about each other. You don't want to have. You have other forms of intimacy. You don't have to be having sex as much as you did when you were first married.
Well, that's my main question to this couple, and of course, it's going to be a rhetorical question because we're on radio. But is the whole relationship feeling strange or old or stale, or is it their sex life? Because if it's their sex life, there can be some pretty easy ways to remedy that. Something as simple as lubrication and a good vibrator. But if it's a byproduct of their relationship in general, that's more complicated. But what Sarah's trying to say is we hope that our relationships deepen, like older wine has a deeper taste. But it's a byproduct of things breaking down and taking time, and there's a lot of stuff we go through in life, and all of that hopefully feeds into a deeper and deeper type of intimacy.
Okay, we've got. I hear that. We've got another listener. This is a man, also desiring not to mention a name. This listener says, "I've been married for several years. We have one child and another on the way. My wife worries that I don't want her anymore. The reality is I'm very stressed. I wasn't really prepared to be a father, even though I had heard everything about it, and I thought I was, and I just don't desire sex as much anymore. But I don't want to hurt her feelings. I feel terrible about the situation. What do I do?"
So going back to that point.
Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
So I guess we'll both answer the question. The angle I want to come with is if sex is about pleasure with each other's bodies, that's one way of thinking. But if it's about, let's start, again, one step back with connection, I would encourage the couple to share their feelings with each other. He should say, being a father is so hard for me. This is so new. It's being stressed in my life. It's not about you. I'm just discombobulated. And after they could be honest and open with each other and kind of validate each other and accept each other's feelings, that alone will bring them to the next level of connection. Okay? And once they go down the road
I think that's a really important message. You see this also in the literature from the sex therapist community, communication, kind of trusting your partner to understand, not to assume that you know what he or she is going to say, and explain and trust that they'll love you and have compassion around the situation. I think it's an important thing for people to hear. We're going to need to take our next break. We'll be right back. We're here with Sarah Morozov and Rivka Slonim. We're talking about the challenges that come up in marriage around intimacy and what to do to regain the spark. We'll be right back.
'Cause you see me like a UFO that's like never. 'Cause I made you use your self-control.
So Equal Footing has been brought to you for years now by Mechanical Art Capital. Mechanical Art Capital has a simple message for you, a simple business model. Do you have watches in your safe? Are you a watch dealer, a timepiece dealer? Get cash for those watches just sitting around. You don't actually have to sell them. You do it through a creative buyback program. It's halachically sound. You can get money overnight, max 2 days. Go onto your Android device, your smartphone, and download the app for Mechanical Art Capital. It is Mechanical Art Capital. That's 3 words. And you just upload some pictures and videos of your watches, and you get an offer within hours, and you can, again, get the money the next day. You can also go to their website, mechanicalartcapital.com. Get value from your watch collection or your watch inventory.
If you don't mind, I want to just end off.
Okay, we've got a couple of other. I want to make sure as we wrap up on this topic that we get to some of the listener comments, the tough stuff. So I was kind of vibing that some listeners might not be getting the practical advice that they wanted to, and this listener verifies that. He says, this is not helpful. In a sense, it makes me feel guilty. Is it me? I mean, let's try to get raw here for a second, Sarah and Rivka. When you have a situation where you have a partner that feels unwanted, and they're expressing you don't feel this is another underlying issue in the relationship. Of course, there are normal stresses and strains of any relationship or parenting or financials, whatever it might be, but you have one partner that wants to have sex more than the other. How do you get through that kind of that wall of what can be shame or hurt or guilt? How do you break through?
So first of all, we have to be realistic about expectations. It's very common in the world, whether we're from or not from, male, female, that our desire changes and shifts over time. Desire discrepancy is human. So as number one, we have to know that in our journey of marriage, there will be times that's not that we're unwanted, but for other side reasons. I assume that they have a healthy marriage, like Rifki said before. If they have a healthy marriage, so they're not, what does it mean unwanted? Perhaps we have to separate, are they truly unwanted as a person, or they perceive it as feeling unwanted because the other one is just not in the mood for whatever reason that's perhaps even beyond their control. So going back to what I said earlier, the Torah says, "V'ha'adam yoda as Chava v'tar v'teved," right? Adam knew Chava, and she conceived and gave birth. Okay, the foundation of intimacy is knowing. There's that element of knowing each other and understanding each other. So before we create issues, let's go back to basics. Do we know what's going on by the other one? Do we understand what they're going through? Once we have that knowledge, then we could brainstorm to find solutions, and we can communicate. But let's begin and find out what's really going on. Why is she feeling unwanted? They need to be honest. They have to make themselves vulnerable. They need a conversation where they can have honest communication without blame, without guilt, and without shame. Two people who love each other want it to be good for each other.
Do you recommend that conversation take place? Where's the place to go for guidance on that conversation? Is it to someone like yourself? Is it to a rabbi? Should they see a therapist, or just give it a go themselves?
The first place to go is between themselves. Again, they have to create the right setting. They have to put down the rules. No shaming, no blaming, no anger. They have to pace themselves, and that also depends how they have other touchy conversations in their marriage. How do they deal with financial discrepancy? How do they deal with differences, how they're going to raise their children, or where they want to live, or where they go on vacation? So if it is going to be a touchy conversation, the same way they navigate other touchy conversations, and if it's done in a healthy way, they could navigate this conversation themselves as well.
I want to say something radical. To the guy who's not feeling, as horny before he was a father, as before he, became a father, get over yourself. Your wife wants sex. Give it to her. And very often when we do something for someone else, we find ourselves willy-nilly slipping or sliding into the mood. And this is connected to something I said earlier. As a society, we are infatuated with the self. If we're going to talk from a Torah perspective, it's very much about being part of something larger. Our intimate lives fuel our marriages. Marriage is not just a personal lifestyle choice. It's a mitzvah. It's a building block of society. And I am not, with this, negating pleasure in marriage. On the contrary, I'm saying something that's been said over and over again. Happiness is not something you can run after. You need to engage
Rivka,
in certain.
I love it when I love it when you're willing to say something radical. I appreciate your message to that listener. I'll meet you there, though, and say, as a man, it often isn't that simple. It's if you're under immense stress, or you've got something else going on, or if the issue itself of the lack of physical intimacy has become kind of an 800-pound gorilla or an elephant in the room, then it's often hard to get an erection.
I understand. So forget about the erection, forget about yourself, and pleasure her. And there are numerous ways of doing that. And you know what?
Yes, but
it might happen to your own body.
You know what always happens on the show? We always get into the interesting stuff right at the end. That's why we made this a part one of a two-part series. But that I've heard that before. I'm sorry to stop thinking about your anatomical part. Just there are other ways to please your partner. And that's, by the way, said with both genders, because also there can be issues with women not feeling this, even though they want to, not having the same type of desire and feeling terrible about it. But Rivka, what often will happen in that situation is that the female partner will still feel like something's wrong. So, if he's not getting an erection, he's not attracted to me like he used to be. He doesn't want me. He's getting it somewhere else. These are real world feelings. So it often isn't as simple as, okay, well, you can engage in oral sex, you do other things.
Making her feel cherished, and her making sure she knows that she's the only one and the only thing, and that takes us back to trust being the backbone of intimacy. Look, I don't think anybody's looking to this program to get just raw sex. There are easy ways to do that. People want intimacy. That's what they yearn for. And that's more complicated, and we're going straight back to where we began. You can't separate the physical from the, emotional. You can't separate the bedroom from the rest of life. It's complicated, but I think, there's a lot of comfort in knowing it's complicated. Everybody goes through this. It's okay. Love each other. Keep what's most important. Take the long view. Take the long view. Don't get caught up in that moment or that hour or that week or even that month. And don't let your history become prophecy. Let your imagination guide you where you can go for the next month and the next month and the next year.
I think that's great guidance. We're going to need to wrap up here. I'm wondering, Sarah, if you had one simple message to deliver based on your extensive experience working with couples, one simple message around when you hit that rough patch. A couple in the beginning, they're often very attracted to each other, and they're having sex all the time. Everything's, wonderful. But you are going to hit a rough patch at some point. What's the message you should have in your back pocket ahead of that experience?
Number one, talk to each other about it. Share your feelings. I'd love to be with you. I'd love to enjoy it. I'm just going through such a hard time at work. I feel like such a failure. Just share the experience with each other so you come to a level of understanding of what's really going on. That's number one. Number two, don't give up. It's a rough patch, but there's the light at the end of the tunnel. We have to move. Sometimes we just have to accept the rough patch as it is, but our goal is to move to a better place, and don't be ashamed to reach out for help. Because this is not just like a little thing going on in your life. Torah says it's like, the holiest part of the home is the master bedroom. That's where the shechina comes down.
We're gonna have to wrap up. That's a wonderful message to leave people on. I love that. Don't give up. Thank you, Sarah Marzo. Thank you, Rivka Slonim. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, did she make you cry? Make you break?